A colossal empire, vast and ancient, stood on the precipice of an unimaginable transformation in the early 20th century. Imperial Russia, ruled by the Romanov dynasty for 3 centuries, was a land of staggering contrasts, immense natural resources alongside widespread poverty, deep spiritual devotion alongside rampant corruption, and a rich cultural heritage overshadowed by an autocratic government stubbornly resisting change. This volatile brew finally erupted in 1917, unleashing the Russian Revolution, a series of seismic events that not only dismantled the Tsarist regime but also established the world as first communist state. This revolution profoundly reshaped Russia, impacting global politics, ideology, and the very course of the 20th century. But what deep-seated grievances simmered beneath the surface of this vast nation? What immediate crises pushed it past the breaking point? And how did a small, radical faction seize power to foot a new, revolutionary order? Before 1917, Russia was characterized by an entrenched autocratic rule under Tsar Nicholas II. Believing firmly in his divine right to rule, Nicholas resisted any meaningful political reform, viewing liberal demands as threats to his power and the established order. Russian society was starkly divided. The vast majority of the population, over 80%, were peasants, many of whom had only been emancipated from serfdom in 1861 but still suffered from land hunger, poverty, and antiquated farming methods. While Russia had begun a belated and rapid industrialization effort, a relatively small, but increasingly concentrated and radicalized industrial working class emerged in the cities, living in appalling conditions and ripe for a revolutionary agitation. A small middle class sought political reforms and greater representation, while the privileged nobility clung to their land and influence. Often oblivious to the simmering discontent below, the late 19th and early 20th centuries saw the rise of various revolutionary groups. Among them were the social revolutionaries SS, who focused on peasant land reform, and the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, which later split into the moderate Mensheviks and the more radical, disciplined Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin. A significant warning sign came in 1905 when a peaceful protest led to Bloody Sunday, where imperial troops fired on unarmed demonstrators in St. Petersburg. This sparked the 1905 revolution, forcing the Tsar to make limited concessions, including the creation of the Duma, an elected legislative assembly. However, Nicholas II systematically curtailed the Duma's powers, ensuring real authority remained with him. Adding to the instability was the scandalous influence of Grigory Rasputin, a mystic who gained favor with the Empress Alexandra due to his perceived ability to help her hemophiliac son, Alexei. Rasputin's notorious behavior and influence over the royal family further eroded public confidence in the Tsarist regime. The ultimate catalyst for the revolution was World War I. Russia's decision to enter the war in August 1914 was met with an initial surge of nationalistic enthusiasm. However, this quickly dissipated as the grim realities of modern warfare set in. Russia's military was ill-prepared for a prolonged, industrialized conflict. Soldiers were poorly equipped, often lacking basic supplies like rifles and boots. The leadership was incompetent, leading to catastrophic defeats such as the battles of Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes in 1914. Massive casualties mounted rapidly, millions dead, wounded, or captured by 1917. The Tsarist decision to take personal command of the army at the front in 1915, despite his lack of military experience, was a disastrous error. It meant he was directly blamed for the mounting losses and left the erratic Empress Alexandra and the despised Rasputin in charge of the government in Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg. The war utterly crippled the Russian economy. Food shortages became endemic in the cities, inflation soared, and the inefficient transportation system collapsed under the strain of moving troops and supplies. Factories, unable to get raw materials or fuel, ground to a halt. Life for ordinary Russians became unbearable. Strikes and protests escalated in the major cities, fueled by hunger, war weariness, and despair. Public confidence in the Tsar and his government plummeted to an all-time low. The monarchy finally collapsed in the February Revolution of 1917, March 1917 by the Western calendar. It began with spontaneous protests in Petrograd on International Women's Day marches, demanding bread and peace. These protests rapidly swelled, joined by industrial workers striking for better wages and conditions. Crucially, the garrison troops in Petrograd, ordered to suppress the demonstrations, mutinied and joined the protesters instead. This loss of military support sealed the Tsar's fate. Facing overwhelming pressure from his generals and the Duma, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated on March 15, 1917, ending the 300-year rule of the Romanov dynasty. In the power vacuum, a unique situation of dual power emerged. The provisional government, formed by liberal members of the Duma, aimed to establish a constitutional democracy, continuing the war effort, and postponing major land reforms until a constituent assembly could be elected. Simultaneously, the Petrograd Soviet of Workers' and Soldiers' Deputies emerged as a powerful alternative authority, composed of elected representatives from factories and military units. It wielded significant popular support. Particularly among the working class and soldiers, the Soviet held de facto control over the city's military and transport. The provisional government, under leaders like Alexander Kerensky, faced immense challenges. It continued the unpopular war, failed to address the urgent demand for land redistribution, and struggled to alleviate widespread food shortages. Its inability to deliver peace, land, and bread opened the door from all radical forces. The stage was now set for the return of Vladimir Lenin 1870 to 1924, the charismatic and ruthless leader of the Bolshevik faction. Exiled in Switzerland, Lenin was famously transported across Germany in a sealed train by the German government, who hoped his return would further destabilize Russia. Upon his arrival in Petrograd in April 1917, Lenin immediately issued his April Theses, a radical program that shocked many, even within his own party. He called for an immediate end to the imperialist war, all power to the Soviets, meaning no support for the provisional government, nationalization of all land for redistribution to peasants, nationalization of banks and industry. Lenin's simple yet powerful slogans, peace, land, bread, resonated deeply with the war-weary soldiers, land-hungry peasants, and starving urban workers. The Bolsheviks, initially a minority, rapidly gained popular support as the provisional government's failures mounted. A failed military coup in August 1917 by General Lev Kornel against the provisional government inadvertently strengthened the Bolsheviks. Kerensky was forced to arm the Bolshevik Red Guards to defend Petrograd, inadvertently positioning them as the defenders of the revolution. Capitalizing on the provisional government's weakness and widespread discontent, the Bolsheviks began meticulous preparations for a seizure of power. Leon Trotsky, 1879 to 1940. A brilliant orator and organizer, played a crucial role, orchestrating the Military Revolutionary Committee of the Petrograd Soviet on November 7, 1917, October 25th by the old Julian calendar. The October Revolution unfolded. Bolshevik Red Guards and sympathetic soldiers, meeting little resistance, stormed key government buildings in Petrograd, including the symbolic Winter Palace. where members of the provisional government were arrested. The coup was remarkably swift and relatively bloodless. Almost immediately, the All-Russian Congress of Soviets convened, and the Bolsheviks, having successfully orchestrated the coup, declared the establishment of a Soviet government. Lenin's initial decrees aimed to consolidate power and fulfill promises. The decree on peace called for an end to the war without annexations or indemnities, and the decree on land sanctioned the peasants' seizure of land, effectively legalizing what was already happening spontaneously. However, the Bolsheviks' commitment to democracy was short-lived. In January 1918, when elections for the Constituent Assembly, Russia's first democratically elected parliament, returned a majority for the Social Revolutionaries, the Bolsheviks forcibly dissolved it after its first day, demonstrating their intent to rule alone. The Cheka, the ruthless new secret police, was established shortly after, marking the beginning of state repression. The Bolshevik seizure of power quickly plunged Russia into a brutal civil war 1918 to 1922. The newly formed Red Army Bolsheviks fought against a diverse array of anti-Bolshevik forces known as the Whites. The Whites comprised monarchists, liberals, moderate socialists, disillusioned military officers, and various ethnic groups seeking independence. They were often poorly coordinated and lacked a unified vision. Adding to the chaos was foreign intervention. Allied powers Britain, France, the US, Japan supported the Whites, hoping to reopen the Eastern Front against Germany and crush the nascent communist state, which they viewed as a threat. However, their intervention was limited and ultimately ineffective. During the Civil War, the Bolsheviks implemented war communism, a harsh set of policies including forced grain requisitioning from peasants, nationalization of all industries, and extreme centralized control. This economic desperation, coupled with the brutal efficiency of the Cheka and the Red Terror, saw the execution of perceived enemies, including the Tsar and his entire family, in July 1918. Despite overwhelming odds, the Red Army, brilliantly organized and led by Leon Trotsky, ultimately defeated the Whites. Their victory was due to a combination of their centralized command, superior discipline, and the internal divisions and lack of popular support among the Whites. The Bolshevik victory ushered in the formation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics USSR in 1922, a new state founded on communist principles. After the devastation of the Civil War, Lenin introduced the new economic policy NUP, a temporary retreat from war communism that allowed for some private enterprise and market mechanisms to revive tea. He shattered economy. Upon Lenin's death in 1924, a power struggle ensued, from which Joseph Stalin 1878 to 1953 emerged victorious, consolidating his absolute control and ushering in an era of totalitarian rule. Forced collectivization, rapid industrialization, and brutal purges. The global impact of the Russian Revolution was immense. It inspired communist movements worldwide, creating a powerful ideological divide that would shape the 20th century, leading directly to the Cold War. Within Russia, the revolution transformed a largely agrarian, autocratic empire into an industrial superpower, albeit at an immense human cost through state terror, famine, and oppression. It set Russia on a path that profoundly influenced its development for over 70 years, leaving an indelible mark on its people and the world.